Hey, welcome to Capturing Christianity. I am Cameron Bertuzzi, and today we are debating reincarnation. And actually what we're looking at is past life experiences. If you didn't know this, there's actually a whole lot of interesting data. We've talked about this on the show before with respect to reincarnation. So there are these past live experiences that people have recounted. There's a whole lot of interesting data, a whole lot of interesting things going on related to this whole question of reincarnation. And so what we decided to do today was actually to, instead of looking at the actual evidence, which we've done in the past in a previous video with these two guests, what we're doing today is we're looking at the explanations. What really is the best explanation of that data that already exists? So we're going to actually pass it over as we start things off. We're going to pass it to Seth, who is directly beneath me. He is the Christian. Arjuna is diagonal, and he is the Hindu. And what we're going to do is Seth is going to lay out. He's going to take about 5 minutes and just talk about some of the data, and then we're going to give him about 10 minutes to give an opening statement on what he thinks is the best explanation of the data. Arjuna is going to have another 10 minutes for his opening statement. Beyond that, we're going to do some open dialogue for about an hour, maybe throw in some Q&A toward the end of the show, but it's going to be a really awesome show. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. These two guys have been on the show before. Seth has his own channel. Seth, go ahead and mention the podcast that you're currently working on, then we'll get Arjuna's channel as well that we can plug in here.
Yeah, so I'm co-host of the Spiritually Incorrect podcast. We like to do just sort of apologetic adjacent topics.
Nice. Yeah, so definitely go check that out. And then Arjuna's got a YouTube channel called Theology Unleashed. And you've also done debates and stuff. I've heard you like debate naturalists, and those debates are always a lot of fun. You seem, as I was listening to you, and the reason why I've invited you on this channel and we've done work in the past is because you seem to really appreciate philosophy, and you're a very philosophically minded guy. And I think that's another reason why the two of you, like in particular Seth and you, Arjuna, one of the reasons why you guys are such a good matchup, and you're not doing a whole lot of talking past each other. You speak the same language. But Arjuna, it's great to have you back. Yeah, go ahead and feel free to plug your YouTube channel.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Great to be here. Seth's plug for his podcast was the shortest I've probably ever heard. Apologetics, adjacent topics. Great. So thanks for mentioning the channel. I'm a Gaudiya Vaishnava, also known as a Hare Krishna, and really into philosophy, as you noted. So I wanted to be listening to your channel and listening to Alex O'Connor and thinking, I've got things to say about this. And eventually I made a channel so I could bring the Hare Krishna perspective to the online philosophy of religion dialogues and post debates on there, do video essays and whatnot. And Seth was actually the first guest I had on for a podcast, him and another academic I had on. So that was a long time ago when I couldn't even get the audio right.
Yeah, well, Eastern religion is definitely, I think, under... I can't think of the term. It's underrepresented on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so it could just be that I'm not familiar with Eastern religion, but
it's totally underrepresented. Yeah. I mean, most people I don't know what the percentage of Christians are who are interested in doing this kind of philosophy outreach relative to the number of Christians. I think is a lot higher. Plus there's a lot more Christians, but then, when it comes to Vaishnavas, they're mostly interested in book distribution and things like that, and not so interested in making philosophical content. So I'm one of the only people doing it, really, at least from our corner of Hinduism.
Yeah, well, definitely go subscribe if you're interested in philosophy and you're interested in religion. Then go subscribe to both of these guys. And with that, let's go ahead and get into Seth's just overview of the data. And if you're watching this and you're trying to decide, should I actually devote time to watching this entire debate? I think you should, because what's about to happen is Seth is going to summarize some of the data. The data is very interesting. It's very, very interesting. And then again, what we're doing today is we're just talking about rival explanations of that data, but the data itself is just fascinating. Okay. And so I think what you're going to see, or what you're going to hear throughout, not just the little summary that Seth is going to give, but throughout this conversation, it's going to be really, really fascinating. So I highly recommend that you stick around and listen to the whole thing. If you have time, if you're washing dishes or if you're driving, you don't have to actually put it at full screen. You can just listen to it. This is actually a good podcast or a good episode to do that with. But with that, go ahead and take it away, Seth. Give us a quick overview of the data, and then we'll get into your opening statement.
Yeah, can you see the PowerPoint? I've got it up.
Yep, there it is now.
Awesome. Awesome. So I kind of put up a syllogism here. So the data that we're talking about, there's tons of books, there's tons of people who've worked on this, but the most sort of credible, the most at the forefront of this, if you look this up, it's going to be a guy called Ian Stevenson, who's passed away, but his work has been taken up by another psychologist who's by the name of Jim Tucker. They're both at the University of Virginia. Very well credentialed professionals, psychologists. They know what they're doing. And what they ended up looking at is they began to isolate children who from around the world who seem to be able to recall memories of past lives. Now, it's only in the very youngest of children, usually under the age of 6, and usually pretty even younger than that. And what these children were able to do is to recall details such as their spouses, certain life events, manners of death of people who had passed away months or years prior to the birth of the children. And so they found this pretty fascinating. And as they began to look into this, they discovered some more interesting correspondences, such as birthmarks that seem to match wounds the person received when they died. So if someone was, say, shot in the head, there might be a corresponding birthmark on the child that matches the place where the bullet might have entered. Things like that. There was also similar habits. So for instance, if a person was born in a culture that doesn't like a certain kind of food, when the new child was born, who is the reincarnation of that past person, they might not like their new culture's foods. Or if there are certain kinds of phobias. So perhaps the person died by drowning, and the child who's the supposed reincarnation, well, they might be hydrophobic. They might be scared of water. So I can keep going on and on. There's all these interesting correspondences. And what Stevenson and Tucker began to do is just began to dialogue with these individuals, take down the information, and try and track and get the best evidence they could, usually just through accumulating as many cases as they could. And they ended up with thousands of these cases where it seems like children are genuinely remembering or genuinely having memories of lives that they didn't live, of other individuals who'd passed away. Now, in previous videos, I try to problematize that evidence, and I tend to end up something like 50% chance that this is a real phenomenon. I can't get into that at all, but I wanted to sort of put the syllogism here. If children can accurately describe experiences from deceased individuals, then reincarnation is the best explanation of that phenomenon. The second premise is children can, in fact, describe experiences from deceased individuals, and therefore reincarnation is the best explanation of that phenomenon. Now, if we're talking about the evidence, that's going to be premise 2 there. Are children actually remembering these past? Are there actually children out there who have these real memories? Is this a real phenomenon that we need to take seriously? What's the real physical on the ground empirical evidence? We're not talking about that. We're going to assume that these children really do have these memories for this debate. I still think there are some issues. So I'm going to go ahead and, if we're okay on time, I'm going to go ahead and pivot right into my actual argument. We're going to look at premise 1. So premise 1, what I think is that it actually is the evidence, even if we assume it's real, it underdetermines the conclusion. And here's why. All that needs to be explained are shared memories or perceived memories, not a shared soul. There is a logical jump here from the same memory to the same identity or same soul. So reincarnation is, by its very nature, a more complex hypothesis. And I decided I wanted to go through the literature and see, are there other explanations? Assuming that this is a real phenomenon, let's resource all the possible explanations. And I'm not committing myself to any of these. I'm just saying if we're going to allow one paranormal explanation, and that's the language Stevenson and Tucker use, paranormal, then we need to allow all of them and see which one best explains the data. And I found 5 that I think are at least competitive with reincarnation: morphic resonance, the Akashic field, spirit possession, memory bundles, and mental ocean. And I'll try and go through these fairly quickly so to give Arjuna a fair chance. Morphic resonance is the first one. It's proposed by Rupert Sheldrake, probably the most famous one. Rupert Sheldrake's a biologist who graduated from Cambridge. He's become quite well known. He's been on my podcast as well, Spiritually Incorrect. And what he talks about is that he has this idea called morphic resonance. which says that things of a certain morphological category, so human beings, will often obtain similar memories, that memory is tied to form. Now, what's interesting is that Rupert Sheldrake developed this not to explain children who remember past lives. He did this to explain a host of other phenomena, including, say, migration, development, to pets' abilities. Pets seem to have an ability to find their way home from incredible distances. We've all heard stories about that. He uses it to explain crystallization and even the apparent changes in the fundamental constants, which is something he talks about in his book, Science Delusion. But what I found interesting is this also seems to explain children who remember past lives. If there's a similar neurological structure, they might have a resonance with a prior person's neural activity, recall the memories. And I think this could even explain that. And I had to do some hunting, but Sheldrake himself agrees. And for the sake of time, I'll just throw this quotation up there in case you're curious. There's one interview where he says, I think morphic resonance can explain Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker's data in a way that's simpler than reincarnation. Moving quickly along, there's also the Akashic field, which is come up by a guy named Ervin Laszlo, who is a nominee for the Nobel Prize. And what he thinks is that the quantum foam is actually basically a field that retains information, so that all information from all memories of all time is within this field. So it would be possible then to access this A field, this Akashic field, if you had the right capacity. And so he uses this to explain a lot of things. So I think it's actually got a greater explanatory scope than reincarnation. He uses it to explain cosmic fine-tuning, which gets into other apologetic issues. But he also uses it to explain apparent directions in evolution, quantum entanglement, other psychic phenomena. It's got quite a wide explanatory scope. But in a single paragraph in his very thick book, he also throws in that it does explain Ian Stevenson's and Jim Tucker's results without appeal to reincarnation. And just as a side note, Morton Kelsey, who's a former psychologist at Notre Dame, has come up with something similar. And he also thinks that this is a simpler hypothesis with a greater explanatory scope. And moving right along, going through these very quickly, is the idea that Christians love to appeal to, which is spirit possession. When I talk to Christians about this data, the first thing that Christians quite often think about is demonic possession. And that's not necessarily unrepresented by scholarship. J.P. Moreland and Gary Habermas have talked about this. Another scholar named Willem de Arteaga has also thrown this out and thinks that this has a greater explanatory scope. And what I found interesting is that even Ian Stevenson thinks that in some cases, spirits coming in and basically possessing the children explain some of these cases. And he uses this to explain cases where the children will recall memories from individuals who were alive while the child was still alive. This represents some of his best cases. The two individuals were alive at the same time, so the child can't be a reincarnation of the previous person. And so Stevenson will actually appeals to saying, well, maybe the deceased person comes and possesses or speaks to the young child. No, it's not a demon in that case. It's the previous person's life. It's the previous person's soul. But in either case, this is an example of spirit possession. And what I found interesting is this explains all the data. If Stevenson's willing to allow it in these narrow range of cases, he should be willing to allow it in all the range of cases. I haven't seen Tucker make a similar appeal, but at least Ian Stevenson was open to this. But I think this undermines the entire reincarnation hypothesis, because you now have one hypothesis that explains all the data rather than arbitrarily having two. There's another one that you'll find in literature. I call it the new stone tape theory, but it's more generally known as memory bundles. And this is the idea that it's not the soul that survives, but just little packets of memories that are sort of geographically trapped in an area and can be picked up on by individuals. Again, this is a simpler hypothesis. You only need to explain the shared memories, not the shared identities. So it's a bit simpler. But I also think it has a greater explanatory scope. So it's got multiple explanatory virtues to it. It explains why memories are partial. Quite often these children don't remember everything about the previous life, just certain aspects, and other parts seemingly just as important to the previous person's life, they'll get completely wrong. Why? Well, if there's only a bundle that they're picking up, that would explain it. So it explains why so many of these cases are so partial, why they're connected to a geographic region. The children are virtually always reincarnations from someone in the same geographic area. And quite often the parents will have passed through the area where the previous supposed incarnation of the person lives. So the people who hold to this think that they pick up on this. The memory bundle somehow attached to the parents. It's real interesting ideas. It gets into very paranormal territory, but it's that, again, once we open up this can of worms, you've got to open up for all of these, for all sorts of phenomena. And it even actually explains ghost phenomena. The researchers themselves don't hold to this, but it is actually, there are other people who try to explain ghost phenomena by thinking certain areas have like memories to them. So when you experience the woman in the Victorian dress walking down the hall, you're having a memory that's geographically tied to the location. You're not actually seeing a soul of someone. And that's actually called the stone tape theory, which is why I prefer this name, because I think it actually explains multiple phenomena. Again, I'm not holding to any of these, but once we open this, we have to honestly open this can of worms. We have to honestly evaluate which paranormal explanation is the best. And finally, we have the mental ocean theory. This is my own idea. And I just thought, what if consciousness is like an ocean and we're all just cups that are taken out? And when we die, you pour the cup back out. If you keep taking cups of water out of the ocean, eventually some of the water molecules are going to overlap. Now, that doesn't mean each cup of water isn't distinct. It just means that some of the material that makes it up overlaps from a previous cup. So again, what if souls are like that? That whenever we come into being, that we take up some of the soulish material, some of the memories of previous persons. Again, this explains why memories are partial, explains both the hits and misses, and it might even explain why they're geographically local. It's these soulish material might be geographically located. So this is a flying overview, just to sort of open us up from discussion. I want to throw these out as other possible explanations. I don't think they're as good. I actually think reincarnation is a better explanation than these three. But you'll see this in the literature, but I would not recommend going down these routes as well. And as just to sort of close us off, a quote from Ian Stevenson. He himself says, "I would not accept reincarnation as the best explanation for any case until I had eliminated, so far as I could, all other explanations, including paranormal ones." So by his own criterion, until we have eliminated all 5 of these, I don't think that we're in a place to say reincarnation is the best explanation of this data. And there is just some of the sources for anyone who's curious.
Nice. All right. So Arjuna, you've got 10 minutes for your opening statement. As I understand it, you're going to be timing yourself. And then once you finish, we'll get into some open dialogue. So let me also recommend that you guys, if you're interested in this type of content, apologetics, anything related to philosophy, religion, hit the subscribe button and make sure that you turn on the bell for notifications so that you can get notified when we post new content. All right, Arjuna, whenever you're ready. Oh, you looks like you're muted. Yep.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for the nice presentation, Seth. So I'm going to try to reply to various of the points he made, and then maybe some of it will be left over for the open discussion. I guess I'll start by pushing back on the idea that we need to eliminate all the other explanations. I have liberty to disagree with Dr. Ian Stevenson on this point. I think it's enough if reincarnation is the best explanation for the data. I know Seth's fond of kind of Bayesian reasoning here on his debate we did on this channel a while back on the evidence he presented. Let's say that the evidence gives us 50% credence and the evidence actually being what it purports to be, then we're left with 5 competing theories on top of reincarnation. And if we assign them all equal weight, then we're only left with, that would be a 1 in 12 chance of reincarnation being true based on this assessment of the evidence. But I think how it should be gone about is we just look at, so for the purpose of this debate, we're just assuming the evidence is what it purports to be. And then I think what we need to do is look and see which explanation is the best. And I think that for this collection of data, reincarnation is the best explanation. The next point I'll make is Seth gave the various competing theories, and he explained how for morphic resonance, akashic field, so many other explanations, there's a bunch of phenomenon that they all explain. So it's, a nice clean morphic resonance explains various things. You can look at the work of Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, but there's multiple things that morphic resonance explains, and reincarnation is another one explained. So it's more parsimonious because we've got one theory rather than two to explain a bunch of phenomena. So I think there's various things like that for reincarnation. So obviously this data is explained by reincarnation. It explains, preferences of food, phobias, birthmarks, gender dysphoria, because there's some cross-sex cases, personality differences in small children. Anyone who's worked at all with small children or has had children themselves will see from day one, practically, you've got dramatically different personalities. We've all seen that. And reincarnation explains because, they're carrying a personality from a past life with them, and that gives them so many different proclivities. So Seth mentioned the evidence underdetermines, which, I think, like Jim Tucker wrote in one of his books that this evidence, there's no perfect case. There's no, we can't have controlled lab conditions for this. It takes place in the messy real world. So really what we have is a collection of cases, which, one case has a perfect feature of one kind of evidence, and another case there's not one case where you find all the evidence all perfectly lined up. But when we find various cases and we assign, say 6% probability to them, and then we've got 2,500, those numbers multiply, and eventually you get a body of evidence that needs to be taken seriously. And then, the theological reasons, which I think if we assume God exists, if we assume God is all loving, God wants us to attain some ultimate perfection, then reincarnation is the best explanation for how God achieves that, because, we think we exist in this life for a reason, and that means our experiences in this life are necessary to grow and learn lessons. And presumably we could stuff that up and need a do-over, or, some people die young, some people have different experiences. And if our purpose in this life is actually achieving something, and we can stuff it up, or we can miss out on things that other people get because we have different life experiences, it would make sense that reincarnation would enable us to come back again, because it's, the alternative would be, okay, there's some kind of Christian purgatory that's an after state, and that's where we get all our perfection. But that doesn't explain why we exist here. If that place is a better place to achieve our perfection, why don't we just go straight there and skip all the suffering that we have in this material world? And it's a better form of justice, because instead of there being like just heaven or hell, two states, people are actually get a different body, and there's all sorts of, a whole spectrum of reactions you could get in a future life, so that justice can be extremely fine-tuned rather than being just binary. God giving us future opportunities obviously would be more merciful, rather than us cutting off the mercy tap at some point because we didn't get it right in one short lifetime. Or so that's a bit of reasons why reincarnation explains a whole lot of things, and if we have some theological assumptions. As for the various theories he gave, so morphic resonance, I don't think Rupert Sheldrake has ever presented the reincarnation data as evidence for his theory. I think it was just in an interview he made an offhand remark of, oh yeah, maybe it explains that too. I don't know if he's put it in print at all. So I don't think it's something he puts a lot of weight in. And so, morphic resonance doesn't explain cross-gender cases, because if the idea with morphic resonance is you have rats or mice, and they go through a maze and they learn how to do it faster if they're a similar breed of mice, even if they have no genetic descent. So there's like something about the structure of those mice that can transfer information, or like when chemists in a lab produce a chemical for the first time, it takes longer to crystallize molecule. When they produce the molecule subsequent times, it crystallizes faster. So Rupert Sheldrake's theory is there's a morphic resonance field where this information is stored, so the molecules can form faster, or the mice can transfer that information laterally through a morphic field. And that's how they solve the maze faster, even with no genetic information being passed down, because there's no genetic relationship. They're separate lineages. So there's this like sort of general information that's crossed across species or molecules, but not specific stuff between two individuals. That's one thing. The second thing is cross-gender cases. Two people of different genders are very different from one another. Why would they have this kind of radio frequency-like connection where they're both tuning into exactly the same thing? And the morphic resonance doesn't explain why the memories would be at the tail end of the life. So typically the memories, people are remembering the very end of the life, as you would expect with that's how memory works. We remember more recent things, not older things, and we remember things that are more traumatic or prominent. Whereas morphic resonance field, why wouldn't it just pick random memories from all across the lifetime or from earlier in the lifetime? There's no reason why it would have this tail end focus the way memory typically does. There's akashic fields. I would give a same objection to akashic fields. If kids are accessing it, then why are they accessing it for one specific life? And again, why are they accessing the tail end of the life typically? Demonic possession, yeah, you could say there's a phenomenon there in the data where we're giving us an auxiliary hypothesis of demonic possession. I think another thing that could be going on is what in New Age circles they call walk-ins. I think there is some stuff in the Vedas about this sort of thing, but it's not something I've actually read up on. But a walk-in is basically where instead of entering the body from day one and going through all the stages of infancy, at some point one soul leaves, another enters. So this is just perhaps a different kind of reincarnation. And for those cases that are being explained by those alternative hypotheses, we could just say, well, those ones aren't evidence for reincarnation, they're evidence for something else, and these other explanations suit them better. But I don't think, well, walk-ins, I'd just call it another kind of reincarnation. Demonic possession, yeah, it's another hypothesis, but I don't think it brings down any reason to believe in the other evidence as pointing to reincarnation. Memory bundles in the mental ocean, I think the objections I have would probably land on both of them. So for memory bundle, I think we'd also be wondering why we're getting the tail end memories. Why just one specific, well, I guess you could say it's one specific person because they just got one memory bundle. Seth mentioned that he thinks the memory bundles explanation explains the data well because these kids have imperfect memories. They remember some things accurately, some things inaccurately, some things they don't remember at all. That's just how memory works. I mean, I think some research on memory says a lot of our memory is actually stories we tell ourselves about what we remember rather than actual memories. That the kids have better memories of these things when it's talked about often or when they have exposure to things from the previous life. And that's just how ordinary memory works. We remember some things inaccurately and some things accurately and some things we totally forget. Yeah, like the mental oceans one, I don't understand why, if there's, this ocean of memory and, some of it gets reused in our cups when a new soul is made. I don't understand why any integrity of the memory would be maintained. I mean, you pour a cup of water in the ocean and it just becomes homogenous. So I'm at 10 minutes there. I think I've covered the main points I had in response to Seth's opening. Right on 10. Perfect.
All right, so let's now move to a time of just open dialogue between the two of you guys, and we'll go for about an hour, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A, if you guys are okay with that. And so during this time, I usually try to stay out of the conversation as much as possible. I'll only butt in if I need to help move the conversation along or if things are getting heated, which I don't anticipate. But yeah, have you guys have some fun. So Seth, we'll let you come in since Arjuna was just sort of responding to a lot of the stuff that you said, and we'll let you kind of kick us off.
Yeah. So let me just throw out a few points of response. I'll ignore the theological stuff so we can stay pretty much on target. But he consistently kept asking, why is it only the tail end if it's of the life, if it's these other explanations? Well, the same question could be asked for the reincarnation hypothesis. Why is it just the tail end of the life? I'm glad you brought this up because I actually think these other explanations explain it better. Because remember, it's the memories that are preserved, not the soul. And memories that are more reinforced, the things you remember most strongly, we would expect to be preserved more strongly, whether it be in memory bundles, whether it be in morphic resonance. These are the sorts of things that would be preserved most strongly because from our only data is our own subjective experience. It's those sorts of things that are preserved most strongly in us. If I have a near-death experience, I'm never going to forget that. So, and the same thing here. So you talk about Rupert Sheldrake. I'll just give, just to quickly switch over to him. You say it doesn't explain cross-gender cases. Well, I think that misunderstands what morphic resonance is in this case. It's about the neurology, not the morphology. It's not about the, what sort of sex someone is. It's about what's going on in the brain. And I actually think morphic resonance has an extreme advantage here because children are more neuroplastic. So that if that's the case and things resonate with prior morphic fields, then the most neuroplastic individuals will be the ones that resonate with individuals in the past the most readily, which is why it probably disappears after the child grows up. And you say it doesn't explain specific individuals. Well, actually, it does. So Rupert Sheldrake gives the example of monarch butterflies. They don't complete a full migration in their own life, and yet their offspring know where they are at in the journey. And so somehow there's being a morph. The individuals are picking up from the memories from the prior generation or from their parents. And when it comes to walk-ins, I think just as a sort of
well, Seth, why don't we let Arjuna come back on some of that already, because there's already a lot on the table.
Sure, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, people of different genders have different brain structures in many ways. So, I mean, there could be something similar, although there being some difference. Monarch butterflies, yeah, I wasn't aware of that. Obviously, you've studied his work a bit more than I have. But I mean, the monarch butterfly is just getting some generic thing of, keep heading in this direction to this location. That we don't know that they're getting anything more than that. And the other thing we'd expect with morphic resonance is one person. Maybe there's just amount of data is just too small, but you'd sooner or later expect to find two people remembering the same past life. Obviously, we get that with famous people. There's lots of people who think they were like Cleopatra or something like that, but we're talking about the cases where there's actually evidence.
Not necessarily, actually, because it would take a very precise. You would expect this to be quite rare to precisely resonate with a particular individual. I think you're right. When it's more general, it's easier to resonate with these fields because they're reinforced by a broad range of individuals. When it's a particular individual, it would take a very intense experience, like a violent death. Maybe that's why most of these experiences happen in violent deaths. Again, I think morphic resonance can explain that. To really have to form a field that a next individual would resonate with. And then it would take a precise series of neurological similarities to resonate with that. The odds of that happening twice in the same time and that researchers would uncover both is ridiculously small. And remember, these cases are quite rare, even though there's a lot.
There's 2,500 recorded cases and there's 8 billion people alive right now.
Right.
So how many cases before we'd expect to see a repeat?
Yeah, exactly. What if it's like 1 in a million, right? We would expect maybe we need 1 million cases before we see,
that's fair.
Person A to resonate with person B.
That would be a prediction of morphic resonance field that there would be some repeat cases, but the data set's too small for us to expect to see any yet.
Yeah, well put. Yeah.
I'm not understanding what you just said about how morphic resonance is, so there's something about a traumatic events leading up to the death of the individual that creates a little memory bundle or morphic resonance bundle that they can just shot off and lands on some child somewhere.
No. So what I'm saying is that what Rupert Sheldrake thinks is that memory is tied to form, right? Essentially, that's basically the most simple way to put what morphic resonance is. And the memories that are most intense are going to be ones that are repeated as a habit, or the ones that are the most intense, the ones that form themselves most strongly in our memories. So those are the two ways you can create a morphic field. One very gradually, step by step, and one is sort of a giant leap. And the latter case is what I'm saying, is why are the memories so much of a very violent death? And I think that's because these are so traumatic experiences that they form very rapidly these morphic fields. I'm not saying I believe this. I'm saying that if you were to wanted to hold to this, that they form these morphic fields that later children who are very neuroplastic are more likely to resonate with, especially if they're in the same geographic area. Although he doesn't think it's geographically tied, so maybe I shouldn't throw that in there. But in the same neurological, morphospaces, so to speak. I'm trying not to be too terminological, but yeah, does that make sense? Does that help out at all?
Yeah. Right. So there's something about an intense experience, but then my question would be, if an intense or traumatic experience is something that cements this morphic field to be tied with these memories, then couldn't that happen for people who survive too? Couldn't we have someone have a really traumatic experience, create this morphic field, survive for another 40 years, and some child pick up on that morphic?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it would, but the question is who's looking for that? Yeah, there are no researchers looking for those sorts of things. So I think it does. It is a testable hypothesis, right?
I think,
Uh, People who have
well, with the
near-death
data,
experiences.
so the researchers find these children, and then they look for a matching previous personality. That's the term they
Mhm.
use. So I think they are looking, and if they looked and found a case, and then the person was still alive, they'd record that.
Yeah, but mostly when you read the cases from Tucker and Stevenson, they limit because there's so much data out there. They have to limit themselves. This isn't a fault in their research, but they limit it to prior to dead people, essentially. They look at how people died. They go to this, they go to the death, the reports of their death, and they find out how the person died. There aren't reports like that for near-death experiences, not normally, right? And they're not easily accessible. And so this is why I don't expect this stuff to show up in research.
So I think what you're saying is Stevenson and Tucker, when they find a case of a child having the features they look for, then
Mhm.
they go to find a previous personality. When they're looking for previous personalities, they're only looking for dead people. Which would mean if we went through their files of unsolved cases, meaning they hadn't found a matching previous personality, and continued digging, we would expect for some of those cases to find an individual who was still alive at the time.
Yeah, it'd be quite difficult because we do have records of how people die, but we don't have records of how people almost died.
Oh yeah, but one of the features people's report is how they die, but they also say, I lived in this town, this was my name, this is
Right.
what my son was called, this is what he did for a job, this is what my
Mhm.
house looked like. And they can use those features to identify a previous personality.
Yeah, I suppose you could, but the question did when they did their research, do they count these as hits? Because they probably had a lot of these false hits, where it's like it's nearly works, but it doesn't quite. But then there might be another, and they'll rule that out because they're testing the hypothesis of reincarnation. That's what good researchers do. So I don't fault them for this. I'm saying once you add this in as a competing hypothesis, it creates different data. So we would have to reassess the data and see if maybe there are a few cases like this. I'd suspect them to be unbelievably rare, just because of the lack of data. But yeah,
All right, I guess we'll park that one until more data comes
probably. Yeah, probably have to. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Clarifying. So I threw out the mental ocean as a sort of just fifth sort of random possibility. And you said you're not sure how the integrity of the memory is preserved. So I think, I guess is less. Maybe I should clarify that because if I want to make sure that's understood. The idea is that the memories are like the water molecules, right? Because water molecules are preserved, and it is possible that whatever the substance is that sort of forms our spirit, if you believe in that sort of ontology, that sort of it's analogous, and of course this is all analogy, and that these memories can sort of be picked up from previous lives, and so I think that explains everything. I think that can explain all the data, but it's also simpler. So that's kind of just to kind of clarify why I think the integrity is preserved.
So you're comparing the memories to water molecules, but when I think of a water molecule, I think of something generic, and then
Mhm.
you can make things out of the molecules. So I would think the memory would be something that's made out of something generic rather than something generic itself. Like how would
Yeah, I mean,
is there something imprinted on it? Is there something imprinted on the memory water molecule or whatever we're calling them?
yeah. Suppose I like marked a water molecule. Yeah, obviously this is absurd with A, right? And then scoop it up. There's that one with A. Pour it out. Next few I don't, but then I get that A molecule again, right? So it's still marked on it, right? So you could. I mean, that's just to stretch the analogy a bit.
But we're talking about a lot of information being contained on a single molecule. That sounds like something complex that could lose its complexity when it goes back into the ocean.
I mean, it's possible, but it could also be preserved in the same way that, like a soul, like obviously it loses information and back. So, I mean, if as far as the analogies go, the question how are things being preserved across life? And yeah, I think that if you think that these things are preserved, right, that this sort of mental content is preserved within the sort of stream or ocean of consciousness, then this explains it quite easily.
Well, another question I'd have is, I mean, why would God set the world up in such a way that people are randomly getting memories of other people? Is there some soul building feature to that, or is it just some brute feature of reality that we
I
contend
think
with and God didn't really set it up?
it's more of a theological question, right? But I think that's something that, I mean, if theists, no matter what explanation you have to, whether it's reincarnation or not reincarnation, I mean, that's just a question we all have. So, yeah.
Well, I
So,
would argue the reincarnation is the best explanation for how God exercises his perfect justice and perfect mercy and gives us opportunities to advance in God consciousness, but that's a subject for another discussion.
sure, yeah.
I,
But why
I
the
wanted to
previous
bring,
memories on occasion, right? That's the strata that we have to explain. Why does God allow that, right? It's weird. It's going to be weird no matter what, I think.
I mean, on that theory, some children remember their past lives because trauma leaves a really deep impression on the soul, and those deep like we carry impressions with us depending on how deep they are, and the more traumatic, the more it sears itself into our consciousness, and then we remember that. And yeah, and obviously the things that leave deep impressions are things we need to process still. So often, there's Carol Bowman who does therapy with these children and helps them relieve them of some of this trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to, you mentioned with regard to morphic resonance, you were explaining one point in the theory and then saying, I don't believe this myself. And because when it comes to the theory of the data I'm presenting of reincarnation, I actually believe it. I think this is the best explanation. And then you're just throwing out a bunch of hypotheses, and it's kind of like a skepticism raising exercise. But I think more interesting is which hypothesis do you actually believe is
Well,
indicated by the data?
Yeah, so this gets into whether or not I think there's enough data to warrant the phenomenon. And so that's why I say I give it about a 50-50. And so I'm sort of a coin flip on whether or not there even needs to be an exotic explanation, to use the language, the paranormal explanation at all. But given that, I throw these out here because I'm not sure. I think all of these are better hypotheses. I am sure that I think that these are better hypotheses than reincarnation. These 5 in particular, not some of the other ones in the literature. But I honestly don't know which one is the best. I honestly think we need to do a lot more study in order to really determine which is which. And this is why I've kind of had to take a shotgun approach. But but there's a reason for this more than just my agnosticism. It's the fact that I do think that there are just so many competing explanations that can account for this.
Well, yeah, one thing we can do is list all the things that are missing from the data, like work out what it is
Sure.
we would want to come in. So one thing we mentioned earlier was we would want to see cases of previous personalities that were still living at the time that went through some trauma but survived it. And we can work out some other ones later on. There's another point I was going to make, but I forgot it.
But here's the thing, right? Because you can throw this out here, is deja vu, which everyone experiences, is accounted for by morphic resonance.
It's also accounted for by reincarnation.
Sure. And that's my point. And so you want individual cases. So there you go. And I actually think I would argue, I mean, I don't want to get off on deja vu too much. I'd argue that it's better explained by morphic resonance, because this normally reincarnation, deja vu normally happens in places that are highly frequented, which is the idea that a morphic field is being built up there, that when you have similar sensory experiences, you're having similar neurological connections being made with other individuals in the same location, causing an experience this is causing memories from past individuals to arise in your mind. And I think the explanatory scope. Go ahead.
Do morphic fields have geographical limitations? Like with the mice thing or the molecules thing?
So Sheldrake says no. I can't exactly remember why he doesn't think so, though. But he
well, I think of morphic resonance like a radio frequency. So it was like a kind of radio frequency that doesn't have a geographical limitation. So, where were the 2 people that figured out calculus at the same time? How far apart were they?
Leibniz and Newton. Yeah. They Germany and England.
It's not so far, I guess.
I mean, you could do the telephone, Russia and the U.S.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty far. Because, yeah, that's how I think of it, like a radio frequency. So if you tune into that frequency, it's not like a radio broadcast that's like a limited amount of watts, so it only travels so far. It's just something that's like a field all around the world. So, if
Yeah,
they do a lab experiments where mice solve a maze in a certain amount of time in China, and then they do the same thing in America,
right.
then the time they see the same phenomenon of the mice doing it faster if they're a similar breed. So then that wouldn't explain. I think you mentioned morphic resonance was a good explanation, or memory bundles was a good explanation for people, how the parents pass through the area
Yeah,
where the
there
person
are
dies
plenty of
sometimes.
cases. I've read quite a few cases of that, and Krishnan and Kyle bring up those as possible as evidence for that.
I think I guess we could agree that in this case, the evidence underdetermines the hypotheses, because that, like, the way the Bhagavatam and the Vedas talk about souls transmigration is like, it's a bit of geographical, like the soul goes up into the rain and then gets rain on the grains, and the grains get eaten by the father, and then the father, and then the
So yeah,
impregnation and so on. So that fits with this whole, like, the father passed through somewhere and picked up the soul, and then that.
yeah, yeah, definitely. What do you have a response, since we're on the memory bundles thing? I think you asked why. I have written down that you asked why is it to the tail end. Do you have any other responses to the idea that these are just memory bundles rather than full souls that are being picked up by
Well, yeah,
young
with the
children?
memories bundles one, I'm not understanding. So is it? I would think of a memory bundle as something, like I could just shoot off a memory bundle right now while we're having this conversation. It could land on some impressionable child somewhere, and I could carry on
Mhm.
my life. Like, why would it be something tied to the death of an individual? It means the memory bundle's freed up to then go and land on some child somewhere.
Yeah, the speculation is kind of like that when you die, you leave behind these memory bundles, even though you yourself die. That this is in the same way I leave behind a corpse. You might leave behind these bundles in a general area. And so
Is that
otherwise they're sort of restricted in my brain. But whenever, my mind disappears, these memories are not necessarily ontologically dependent upon my mind. They can persist in an area.
Are you leaving behind the memories of all your loved ones that aren't going to heaven? So when you're in heaven, you just forget them all, and they're suffering in hell, and you can be happy.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, they don't get into this, right? Yeah, yeah.
That was just a dig at the Christians who have this idea that, your family members can go to hell and you can be in heaven, and you'll just totally forget they existed, so you'll be happy even though they're burning in hell. It's like,
Oh, fair enough. Okay, I gotcha.
your memory
I've
bundles just shoots off and they're gone, dead to you. So,
fair enough.
um, obviously, lots of Christians don't believe that.
Yeah, fair
um,
enough.
that was my question. I'm not sure why. Yeah, I mean, I guess you gave a theory. We die and then the memory bundles are released. I don't understand why memory would be that kind of thing. Like, the soul carrying impressions with it makes sense, but a memory bundle existing on its own in the ether seems strange. I mean, obviously in brain
Yeah,
science, they don't have a worked out theory of how memories are stored.
right.
So we're open to metaphysical explanations there, but I think it being something the soul carries, it would be the next best hypothesis if we're moving to supernatural.
I mean, it's possible, right? But if we can say somehow the mind can survive the death of the brain and the body, which I think, I don't see any non-arbitrary reason why I can't say memories can as well. I mean, if mental content, if the mind itself can, why not the mental content? And maybe we'd say, well, it's ontologically dependent upon it. Well, we need some sort of argument. And even if we have that sort of argument, like, is that enough to warrant the simplicity of this hypothesis, which is its own explanatory virtue? So I think we need to make the argument and then weigh it against the explanatory virtue of memory bundles, which is it's simpler because you're not having to account for a full-on soul, right? And it can account for some of these more outlier cases where the two individuals lived at the same time. So there's also explanatory scope there. So I think we'd have to. I'd want to hear an argument if I'm going to throw this one off. I'd want to hear an argument for why mental content necessarily must be tied to a mind, and then why that then warrants throwing this off, despite the other explanatory virtues of the memory bundles.
So is an argument which is based on observation. So when we see memories, when we see mental activity, we see them on a person.
Mhm.
And so the reincarnation soul hypothesis is that the person is basically constituted by the soul, and the body is like a machine that we occupy and drive, and obviously it affects us in various ways for a given time. But when the soul leaves the body, the soul dies. The body dies. That if the driver gets out of the vehicle no longer drives. This is the theory of how matter works. It's driven. So this is why scientists, doctors, no matter how much they try, in some cases they can't bring a person back to life. And near-death experience cases that you see people talk about leaving their body, and the doctors are doing everything they possibly can to bring the person back, and somehow the soul enters back in the body, and bam, the person's alive again. So all of this data fits this explanation, and so then we're just saying, well, memories are. We always see memories being carried by a person. We never see, you just suddenly having some of my memories or any other person in your life. You don't just randomly pick up on other people in your life's memories. Your memories are yours that you carry, and they can be inaccurate and so on, but they don't get transferred laterally. So this just fits with what we observe, and we're just projecting that forward onto future lives and saying the same thing's true. If the person leaves the memories behind, they're gone. Just like when you leave your body behind, it dies. And if you carry them with you, they're carried by the soul and they can carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how strong. It's an interesting argument. I'm not sure how strong I necessarily think that is. One is the case of deja vu, where I feel like could be thrown out as a possible counterexample. Two is the fact that any sort of quote unquote memories that I have, I will identify as my memories. So it's impossible to experience a memory that you don't experience as your own memory. And so that's exactly what we'd predict, right? Yeah, if these memories, right?
Well, if you had a memory of having a discussion with yourself on YouTube, you might be a little bit confused if you suddenly picked up on my memories of being on the other end of this discussion.
Right. And I might just throw that out, right? Or something like that, or think that it's my imagination or something like that. But I would still think that's just either my thoughts or my memories. I'm experiencing them as mine, within my subjective ego. And I think that's probably the reason. So can memories survive? I mean, yes, we do only experience memories. Memories are only experienced by minds, but that's obviously what you'd expect. It's predicted as much by the memory bundles. You wouldn't expect to experience memories not in your mind. That's nearly an ad absurdum. It's an absurd thing to even think about. So I think it's equally predicted by both reincarnation and the memory bundles that, all memories are going to be experienced by a mind, essentially.
Yeah,
it's the mind that does the experiencing, right?
Well, yeah. A memory is basically, it's tautologically the kind of thing that a mind has. So then the question is whether a memory can leave one mind and enter another. So I gave the idea of, well, then we would expect to see lateral memory transfer. You were saying, well, we could, even if that were happening, wouldn't notice because I would just remember it as my memories. But I think if we were picking up memories from other people in our lives, because this memory bundle thing or morphic resonance thing, hypothetically, I mean, it's at least based on my understanding of the theories, it's something that could just happen with people in our lives that we interact with. And if that happened, we'd end up with contradictory memories. I'd remember being the guy that picked up the rubbish today, and also remember being the guy wheeled the rubbish bin up the curb. And those contradict each other. Yeah,
and remember, if you hold to either memory bundles or morphic resonance or pretty much any of these are all incredibly rare. So you might have these on occasion, and we all have those things where we think we remember something. So maybe you could throw that out there as a possible thing. I'm not going to, but you could, right? So if someone really wants to hammer in. But I want to hammer in on deja vu, right? If deja vu is, say, a memory bundle, somebody remembered it and somehow left it behind, whether they died or not, or it's picking up on a morphic field, you're resonating with that. What do you say when you experience this? I've been here before. Not I was John Smith and I was here before. You say I have been here before, even though you haven't been, right? And you have this sort of confusion, this aporia, this, I obviously haven't been here before, but I have a memory of being here before. You're experiencing it as your own, right? And that's just, I think, just the nature of minds, of memories. When you experience them you just fundamentally as your own. And so, does that make sense? Are we talking past each other?
Yeah, I'm not someone who gets deja vu much, so it's hard for me to relate to. But
I do.
Right. But I think it's quite a subtle and vague phenomenon that it's hard to really figure out what a best explanation is for it. Like maybe you just had a dream the night before where your spirit angels were sort of just preparing you for your day, so they,
Something
so
like
that's
that.
why
Yeah.
it seems like a memory, but really it was just your spirit angels like giving you some guidance ahead of time.
Yeah. I mean, you could come up with other explanations for it. The reason I'm throwing it out there is not I'm trying to explain it. I'm throwing this out here as an example, right? To sort of illustrate why memories, on these other cases, why memories will always be experienced as our own memories. Um, and so why like mental bundles, like if they can exist on their own, why why our experience of memories is always being tied to minds really doesn't count as evidence against that. Because of course we're going to experience memories only within minds, because that's the only way we experience things is through my mind, is through my experience of the world. And so I don't think that necessarily counts against that. So that, just to sort of bring us back, that's why I'm bringing up deja vu, is to give that as another illustration of why memories will always be that way, whether or not they are ontologically dependent upon minds or not.
So my main objection to that is just that I don't think that memories. I think memories are the kind of thing that just sit with the soul, and if they leave the soul, they're just gone there. So obviously we disagree there. One thing we could perhaps talk about is phenomenal conservatism. So at least for the people having these experiences, for the families that go around this child, phenomenal conservatism is the epistemology where you're justified in believing something is what it seems to be, unless you have reasons, unless you have defeaters for it.
Mm-hmm.
So at least for the children who have these memories and the people immediately close to them, it seems like a case of reincarnation, and they're justified in believing that. Would you disagree with that, or do you think we have a defeater for the people with the first-hand experience?
Yeah, so this is something both Tucker and Stevenson note, is that these are very culturally specific. Not always, we've got James Laniger, Ryan Hammonds, I think are a few Western examples, but by and large, most of these are culturally specific. So I want to separate the phenomena from the interpretation of the phenomena, right? And so phenomenal conservatism, I buy it to an extent, but we also need to recognize that if you grow up in a culture where you believed in morphic resonance, which there never has been one, when you had these experiences, you might say, you would interpret these as, these are experiences of you resonating with a past person's life, right? So your interpretation of the experience will be different. And so that's why I think reincarnation is universally known. Even if you don't grow up in a culture that believes in it, you usually know what it is. And so that's why I don't really think the phenomenal conservatism is really a really good sort of argument against these cases. Just because that's not the phenomena itself. It's not the experience itself. It's the interpretation that we're talking about. That makes sense?
Well, what I'm saying here is the interpretation is the articulation of what it seems to be.
Right, which is the child says, I have a memory. I have an experience, a mental experience of a personality that is not my own, essentially, right? And if conservatism is the conservative part that I'd say, that we want to retain is, yes, the child really is experiencing that as a memory, as an experience, right? And so I think that's all phenomenal conservatism can get us to, is that the child really is experiencing these memories of the past from individuals or personalities that are not their own. Going beyond that is you're going beyond the phenomena, and you're now in the realm of interpretation. That's kind of my point.
Well, to give a bit of detail to it, I mean, you have a child who, James Laniger is probably a good case. He remembers dying in a plane crash. He's acting out what psychologists call post-traumatic play. He's smashing all of his fighter jets, his toy planes, into the coffee table to the point where they all have broken noses. With children who've experienced trauma, will reenact aspects of the trauma as that's how they process it. He's got all this detailed knowledge of World War II fighter planes. He's got like the personality traits you'd expect from the kind of person you describe being, and has this some of the detailed information about the past personality. He wasn't recorded in such a way that they could really call it evidence, but the family members did report him saying things to them that he couldn't have known otherwise. So all of that's just to say this seems like this boy, James Leiniger, I can't remember the guy's last name in the past life. It seems like it's the same person continuing on here. That's what it seems to be the case here. And without a defeater, and maybe us with different hypotheses, a researcher looking at it might come to a different conclusion. But my first question here is for the people in this boy's life who've seen the details of this. Do they have a defeater for their belief in reincarnation, or would phenomenal conservatism lead reincarnation to be?
Yeah, and I think the seeming here is it seems like the boy's experiencing the trauma of a past personality or person or individual, whatever we're going to do, right? That is as far as the seeming gets us, right? It isn't that boy is identified with that person. That's why I'm saying this is why I think that's a sociologically dependent interpretation. If we grew up in a society that interpreted these differently, where that was more, where reincarnation, nobody knew what reincarnation was. Let's say that was just an idea that was completely foreign to people. And there was ideas of like a field.
Do you mind do you guys mind if I jump in really quickly? And you might hear my dog barking in the background, but it seems to me like what you guys are talking about right now with respect to phenomenal conservatism is actually taking us away from the intended debate topic, because the debate topic is what is the best explanation, as opposed to is belief in reincarnation justified or warranted or whatever. So I'd like to, if we can, go back to some of the alternative explanations that Seth has offered. One of them that I haven't heard you guys discuss, and maybe I just missed it, was the demon hypothesis. Can we have some back and forth on that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, on the first debate I did on reincarnation on, I can't remember the guy's name, with G-Man and T-Jump. G-Man I think that was his name. He brought up the angels just planted the memories there. So this is like a kind of, demons planted the memories there. This is obviously a different theory. And I was like, if demons can just plant memories, then how do we know Christianity is true? Because maybe all the memories of the resurrection were also planted by demons. But obviously that's not the hypothesis Seth is defending. I just thought it was a funny thing to point out. But what Seth did mention is that demonic possession, where maybe a ghost, another soul, or maybe some different kind of entity enters the body, and they make it seem like a case of reincarnation, but actually something else is going on. Is that?
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah, it could be a demon, any sort of spirit, right? And so the reason I don't separate these is some people say demons, some people say walk-ins. I avoided that term just because I'm glad you defined it, but it's a bit terminologically nuanced. But yeah, so as long as it's some sort of spirit, right? That's the mechanism.
Well, I like the term walk-in because it's pretty self-explanatory. Wait,
sure, great then.
Dropped out? My screen frozen. I don't know if it's my internet or...
Yeah, it looks like both of you guys are kind of having some internet issues. Hopefully they'll get cleared up here pretty soon.
I can hear you fine if you want to go ahead.
Okay,
yeah,
is that better? Back. Okay, cool. So I think definitely for some of the cases, demon, like it's not like either or. It's not like if reincarnation is the case, then we have to say demons don't exist and never possess anyone. So then the question would be, well, do demons explain all the cases? And I think they explain a few of the cases, but I wouldn't say they explain all the cases. And demon possession existing doesn't in any way negate reincarnation existing.
Yeah, but I would say that saying you never want to multiply explanations, beyond what's necessary. Basic Occam's razor. So if spirits somehow can account for some of these, unless we have reason to doubt it, I think that you should be able to say that they can account for most, if not all, of these cases. And so this is why you don't want to introduce too exotic. Introducing one exotic hypothesis it's bad enough. It's already, you're already going to lose some people there. But introducing two I think that's problematic.
Well, yeah, I mean, it also depends on your background worldview. Like Christians, a lot of them at least, or a number of them, already believe in demons and demonic possession. So you're not adding anything new by saying, yeah, some of the cases are this. The question is just whether whether it explains all the cases. And so, maybe we could take James Leininger as an example. Like, a demon came and started giving him nightmares every night and gave him a bunch of information about World War II fighter jets and some personal information about this guy's life.
Sure.
And does that check out?
That's an explanation, right? That is one possible explanation.
Is it a better explanation than that the same person reincarnated?
Well, I think in some cases it is. I don't know if in the James Leininger, but in the Ryan Hammond's case, the Marty Martin case, which is another very commonly cited one, Ryan Hammond's apparently had ESP abilities, and that's interesting. His parents claimed that he had extrasensory perception of other people's memories, not just his prior life. And I think these other explanations, demons, also these, perhaps A field or something like that. It is, because now all of a sudden you've got a child who's got two paranormal abilities, and reincarnation only accounts for one of them. And now you need something else to account for it. So this is why I think in a lot of these cases, yeah, I do think spirit possession or these walk-ins, whether they're malevolent or not, can account for.
So yeah, Ryan Hammond's Marty Martin, that's the same case. So I think the case of his psychic abilities wasn't that special, was it? Do you want to list a few of them?
Oh, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do remember his parents talking about this. So, and this is not
he predicted
unusual.
a couple of things.
Yeah,
he made a couple of predictions. I don't think it was anything too powerful. I mean, when you survey the general population from time to time, you find someone with psychic abilities, or at least what seem to be psychic abilities, depending how skeptical you are.
But here's the thing: that's two, psi abilities. That's two psi phenomena manifested by the same individual. The best explanation is going to be one that accounts for both.
What are the background rates of psychic abilities? And then, given, of course, when there's a case of reincarnation and it's found that there's psychic phenomenon, that's going to be recorded. But with the background population, who's going around recording and seeing what percentage of people manifest psychic abilities? So maybe it's just like 1 in 100 people have this, and then there's 2,500 reincarnation cases. So then 25 of them have this, and it's just.
Would you deny, though, that one explanation that could account for both phenomena is better than two?
Well, if what I just said is the case, that say that's 1% of the population, and then in 2,500 cases we find 25. It's the exact same rates as we find in the background population, so they just seem to be independent phenomenon. If one explanation is explaining for both, we would expect them to move up and down together.
But giving the ratio of the amount of population isn't explaining it, right? I could say 1 in 100 people have, a certain disease, but that's not explaining why they have the certain disease. So, you know what I mean? So my question is, why do 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or however many people, if they do have psi phenomena, which this is admit they do.
So I think
one explanation would be better, would it not?
I think a general theme in your arguments here is to, looking for parsimony, like, oh, here's another phenomenon, sure. And it's simpler if we just only have that one explanation and don't have that other thing. Whereas, I mean, maybe reality is just complex. So my understanding of how parsimony is to be used in assessing hypotheses is a tiebreaker. So if we've got two hypotheses that both explain the same phenomena equally, then we'll go for the more parsimonious one. But if one of them has better explanatory power than the other, that's then parsimony doesn't get involved.
That's why I threw out. So this is why I threw out things that have a greater explanatory scope as well. So I think the demonic hypothesis has greater explanatory scope. Not demonic, I should say spirit possession, because I don't necessarily limiting myself to demons. Has greater explanatory scope. It can account for the cases that Stevenson himself thinks are spirit possession. So yeah, I think it's got a greater scope. And obviously demons are used to account for a lot of other stuff. We can talk about the evidential value of that. But nevertheless, I think the demonic possession, or I keep doing this, spirit possession does have a greater scope. So it does have that explanatory virtue. But even if we threw it out, right, you said it's a tiebreaker, right? I think spirit possession and reincarnation both might be equal in that case. And so let's go for parsimony, right? Let's go for the simpler explanation, Occam's razor. In that case, I think spirit possession is probably on equal par there. So that's why on that one, if you notice on my slide, I only talked about explanatory scope for that one. But if you already allow for the existence of this, like Christians do, and quite a few Hindus do as well, then why not just go with that explanation in all these cases? You know what I mean? And so this is why I focused on the scope. That makes sense?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's like if my socks go missing, and I know my wife's been through that room, I'll think, oh, she must have moved them. But if my socks go missing and I know gnomes exist and gnomes steal socks, then I'll probably go with the gnomes explanation. But of course,
You don't have to go that
we don't.
exotic, but yeah. It could
Yeah,
be your brother,
right.
you know, who lives
If we
down the
already
street.
have independent reason for believing something exists and it can explain the phenomenon, then we just go with the thing rather than bringing in a new thing. So if
Right.
the demonic possession hypothesis can explain the data, and reincarnation isn't needed to explain any of it because demonic possession can already explain it, and we already have independent reason for believing demonic possession, then I would agree we don't need to invoke reincarnation. So let's look at whether demonic possession does explain the data. So
Go ahead. Yeah.
the case of Marty Martinson, the boy Ryan Hammond's Remember the Life of Marty Martinson. He had a few psychic abilities. But basically, he was just an ordinary boy that, made a few predictions from time to time. He was actually quite traumatized by these memories of the past life, and it was quite difficult for him. And basically just, I don't know what he's up to now, but there's it's not like, I mean, when we talk about, Christians talk about, Catholic priests, like exorcists, freeing people of demons and their suffering. I mean, sure, these kids with the past life memories are suffering, but they're suffering in the way we'd expect if they'd suffered a trauma in a past life and the trauma hadn't been resolved and they had some memory of it and that they were still resolving. They're not suffering in the way you'd expect if some demon was possessing them and making them do things, and you know what I mean?
Well, this is why I say spirit possession, right? I'm not limiting it to malevolent spirits. It could be, and maybe this is the way they do it, because you have the Hollywood image of a demonic experience, and maybe those, we have, I interviewed an exorcist on my podcast. Cameron's interviewed quite a few, but nothing is saying that those are the same kinds of spirits, that they're doing the same kinds of things. This is why I make it as generic as possible, because you don't know what the spirit is doing, and this is why Stevenson, why is the spirit in these particular cases where the two individuals lived at the same time, why is the spirit going over and giving memories to these kids? Stevenson doesn't need to feel the need to explain why, but it does explain the data. And he thinks that's the best explanation we have. We can question motives all day, right?
I haven't actually read a case where both people were alive at the same time. I read a case where one person died and then a boy was on pretty much dead. And it sounded like a walk-in case to me. The dad was actually like on the process of burying the son, village India, where that's how they do it. And then the boy came back to life, but had a completely different personality. That sounded like a walk-in to me. Are you aware of cases where both people were alive?
Yeah. So Stevenson, I can't think if Tucker talks about these. I know Stevenson gives about a dozen. Says there's about a dozen. He doesn't list. I don't remember him listing them out there, except for one of just Sujith and Sammy. But that one's a bit questionable because
that's the one I just mentioned. Yeah.
No. So the child was 3 months post conception. So the child was 3 months, 3-month developed child. Whenever the prior incarnation passed away, so the child was in development. So, but then you could just say the soul entered at month 4 or something like that, So that one's a bit iffy. But there are other cases that Stevenson himself acknowledges, which is why he comes up with the idea of walk-ins and spirit possession as a secondary hypothesis to account for only these extraneous cases that reincarnation can't cover. And that to me just felt very arbitrary. So this is why I bring that up.
Yeah, right. I mean, obviously there's more that could be looked into the evidence there, but it sounds like we don't have the details on it of those specific cases to get into it just
Unfortunately,
now.
Right.
Arjuna, I was actually... Do you mind if I just ask you a question? Because I'm just not sure about it, and I think it'd be helpful for the audience as well. In Hindu theology, is there are demons, spirit possession? Is that part of the belief system or not? Would that be part of like?
We do have stuff about that. Yep.
Okay, so that would be something that someone like you and someone like Seth would both believe that this is part of our ontology. So this could be some sort of, explanatory resource that we could pull from. Okay. I just wanted to get that clarification. So yeah, feel free to go ahead with what you were saying.
So with spirit possession, are you suggesting like this, the soul of Marty Martison was like couch crashing in Ryan Hammond's body?
I'm saying that some sort of spirit might account for it. In that case, I mean, getting into particulars, you're getting very speculative, right? So this is why you want to frame the hypothesis as generically as possible, and then test that hypothesis against reincarnation, because we're not talking about a very particular idea of reincarnation, right? We're talking about reincarnation in general, right? In the same way, we're not talking about any particular spirit. Maybe it was the prior incarnation. That if that accounts for the evidence the best, great. But it could be a demon. It could be some other spirit. Who knows what it could be, right? And this is why I define it very generally. But if you want to run with that, we can, just as a test case.
Yeah, I mean, without the details, it's hard to pick the theory apart. So I don't think the version of reincarnation indicated by the evidence is that vague. We're talking about a soul, the same person, simple view of identity, carrying memories, carrying personality traits.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what else you would expect to be fleshed out in a theory of reincarnation beyond those features.
Maybe rephrase that, because I'm not sure what you're saying.
So you said that we're not talking about a super detailed theory of reincarnation. We're talking about reincarnation in general, and so similarly,
Just
spirit possession. We're not talking about very specific worked out case. We're talking about it in general. But I think the reincarnation as a hypothesis here, the way I'm presenting it, is actually quite detailed and worked out compared to the spirit possession case you're working about. Like, I can tell you who I think the soul is.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's say in order, let's just say, we want to say that it's. I'll grant that for the sake of argument. I do object to that, but go ahead. Let's just say that it is the Marty Martin's soul, right? That is, whispering in the ear or provoking Ryan Hammonds into believing that he is this person.
Couch surfing in his mind.
Sure. Yeah, I like that.
So I guess you want me to offer some objections to Marty Martison couch surfing in Ryan Hammond's mind.
Why not? Yeah, because that is, I think, equally good. I do believe that.
There's at least one case I read documented by Dr. Stevenson that seemed like that kind of possession, where it was like, and the girl showed different personality types. It was actually like a split personality disorder kind of manifestation, where it's like, now she speaks perfect Bengali and now she can't speak Bengali at all. And now she has all these personality traits and now she's back to her normal self. And that's what I would expect to see from a spirit possession case. It's kind of like, when ordinary people go about their life, they might have some trauma that they're just suppressing, and sometimes they'll be contemplative and talk about it. But there's a continuity of personality type. So it's the same person, just in a different emotional state. Whereas with the spirit possession case, when it's like, oh, this is a case of possession, completely different personality. That's the experience that the people have that know this person intimately. And why wouldn't we see that from these reincarnation cases?
So we actually do see that in the Ryan Hammond's case, right? So after real interest really sort of picked up. So after the TV episode aired on Ryan Hammond's, he said he lost all interest in Marty, and he said it was time to be a normal kid again. And so a lot of this stuff sort of went away. And this is actually a particular thing in children, right? If there's a spirit possessing them pretty early on, say they go after children, because they're more susceptible, they're more neuroplastic or whatever. Then after a certain amount of time, you might expect to see personality shifts. And this is what you do see, is that Stevenson records that one of the commonalities is that these children sort of revert into a different sort of lifestyle. If they had particular habits and things, they tend to go away, usually by the age 5, 6, or 7. So yeah, I do think so. And I think you're comparing this. It sounds like you're comparing this to cases where walk-ins happen sort of later in life and you see a different personality shift there. I don't think you can use that in the case of children because it happens so early on, right?
Yeah,
Who are
I
you
mean, that
comparing
is a
to?
fair point about children, but like I think in the case of I should pull up the name, as I don't know if it's Sujit Sami or another case where the boy died at 2 or seemed to die, and then it seemed like another spirit entered, and like basically
Yeah.
from then on it was like overnight this seems like a different personality. That
Hmm.
seems like either a walk-in or a spirit possession case, or the example I gave of the girl Stevenson wrote about where she could actually speak a language she couldn't speak some of the time, and the other time she couldn't speak it, like big
Yeah.
differences, and maybe she was a bit older. So with children we would expect to see some kind of oscillating back and forth. There was one case I've watched a YouTube video about where a boy in Israel somewhere where they're Jewish and they speak Arabic, or I don't know. He could speak English really well from
Lebanon.
like
Lebanon.
Lebanon. From really young, he could speak
It's
English really
roots
well, and
culture.
it's like, did he learn it from TV? Like, where did he learn it from? His family can't speak English, not as well as he can.
His neighbor did.
And
His neighbor did.
so that could be a reincarnation case, but if it was, but that's just an example of how you can get really profound things carried over. So if it's spirit possession, we would expect to see these things coming and going somewhat. Although
Yeah.
maybe they just get written into the brain of the child, and then even when the spirit's gone, the child still has it there because it's imprinted on their brain. But I think we'd still expect to see some differences. But maybe what we can just say is people can go and read about the case of Ryan Hammond's Marty Martinus and for themselves and see whether it reads to them like a personality shift or just the same person in a different emotional state. I mean, we see that with ordinary people. People go through something, they have an obsession with something, they're resolving some trauma, they're really focused on something, and one day they're like, it's just time to move on.
Yeah.
I'm done with
And
this and I'm going to move on. So yeah, people can
Mhm.
just look at the case and make up their mind for themselves, and we can perhaps move on to discussing another point.
And all I'd say is, all I would say is, the possession itself might manifest in different categories and in different ways. We'd expect this to be individual in each case, right? This is a very sort of unique phenomenon. Yeah, but we can move on. Is there anything you had for me? Any other things you wanted to question for me?
As regards to the evidence, I mean, I just want to quickly make one last point about the phenomenal conservatism. Maybe Cam will tell me off, which is like you said, what we're having is as a child who seems to remember this, seems to have these features. If we applied that epistemology to other things, it'd be like, I seem to be having a tree experience. I'm being appeared to treely, but that's not what we say. We say it seems to me like there's a tree over there. So similarly with the
Yeah.
reincarnation case, it seems like this boy has reincarnated. But yeah, that's one comment I want to make.
Yeah. What I'd say there is, I am having the experience of a tree, and then the best explanation of that is the tree itself, right? I save the appearance in the most conservative way possible, right? Which is the postulation that they're external entities. But that doesn't mean every time I see a tree, right? There can be defeaters for that. In the case that maybe there's a simpler explanation, which is someone has put up, a fake tree in front of me, and that would act as a defeater in that case, right? And that's just what phenomenal conservatism just basically is that idea. And so what I'm saying is I'm offering, like there are these experiences, right? I'm seeming to have that. And if you're jumping to this and saying it's the most conservative, these can act as defeaters because I think they explain the data better. They explain your experience of them better.
Yeah, and then just a more general point about your thesis here. You mentioned in your opening something about reincarnation being the best explanation. Do you want to put that in your own words and flesh it out? What you were saying there?
What did I say again?
I don't. You might have been talking about something quite specific, but you did use the word reincarnation being a good explanation. I thought maybe you were saying like, we've got all these different hypotheses, and reincarnation might be the best of them, but all with the cumulative case of all these other explanations, actually reincarnation.
No. Yeah. So let me clarify. Sorry if that got confusing.
Cool.
So I threw up at the end there. I think what you might mean is I threw up the five that I think that are actually equal to or better than reincarnation for explaining the phenomenon of past life memories are the ones that I listed and went into detail. There are three that I think that I've noticed have also been thrown out. ESP, Jungian, collective unconscious, and genetic inheritance. And I think those are bad explanations. I think reincarnation is better than those three.
Right.
I threw those up there because those have been thrown out, and I wanted to just sort of address those, but also say I don't think those are good. I think of the 9, I think reincarnation sort of comes in. What is that, 6th?
Sixth. Okay.
Yeah.
So you think all of the other 5 that you've given, that you given weight to excel reincarnation as good explanations?
Equal to or better, yeah.
Right. We haven't discussed the Akashic Field one. For me, the Akashic Field memory bundles and mental ocean, I would put them all in the same category and offer the same objections to all of them. Or is there some differences between the three that I'm missing?
Yeah, they're different. So the way I separate these is what is the mechanism that explains it, right? It doesn't matter the sort of entity, but the mechanism that explains it. And often these will come up with different hypotheses, right? So the memory bundles is geographically located, whereas the Akashic field is not. He thinks that this is sort of across the spectrum. You know, like I can instantaneously access the Akashic field of a Martian in that way. So they end up with these end up being different, offering different mechanisms. You know, the A field appeals, the Akashic field appeals to the quantum foam, whereas memory bundles does not. It appeals to something more metaphysical. So this is why I separated these out. Does that make sense?
Right. I mean, yeah, the geographic
They stand and fall
would
on
be
their
some
own.
differences. I mean,
Yeah.
you could, if something's geographically limited or not geographically limited, then depending on what the data looks like, you could see whether it's the best explanation or not. But other than that, I mean, you explain they've got different ontological explanations of how the mechanism of them actually works.
Yeah.
But I don't know if those details of the ontology behind them changes how objections would land or not land on them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So which objection are you thinking of specifically so I can address it?
Well, we already went over a few of my
Okay.
objections to that, which
Fair.
is why the tail end of the life, why just one life, why not someone who's still alive, why cross gender cases.
Right. Let me go back to you. Why is the tail end of the life? You brought that up for quite a few, and my curiosity is why is reincarnation any better to explain why the tail end of the life is remembered? Because whatever answer you give for reincarnation, I feel like you could give the same answer for these others.
Well, reincarnation, you're remembering the tail end because that's how memory works. We remember more recent things better.
Sure.
We remember more traumatic things better.
Memory bundles, A field will Rupert Sheldrake's morphic fields dissolve over time if they're not consistently sort of vibrated, you know, if they're not consistently reinforced. Yeah, you could give a similar explanation, right? Because it's all memory in those cases.
Idea about morphic resonance. I haven't heard that idea of them needing to be constantly vibrated. But then we have some cases of people remembering a past life from 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Then we have to wonder how that field was maintained.
Yeah, but those don't tend to be very strong. You would expect those to be rarer, and they are rare. Yeah, 5 to 7 years, I think. I could be wrong on that, but I think it's like 5 to 7 years is the average for that I saw in one study. That you get different results from different people, but they're usually under, 30, 40 years between lives. So between two lives. Which makes sense if you believe in like memory bundles or morphic resonance. Yeah. So I think they can account for it.
Right. I wonder if there's something Cam wants us to spend some more time on, or.
It's actually about time to switch over to some Q&A with the audience. And so I do have one question so far, but I'd like to ask the audience, if you do have a question for either debater or presenter tonight, please leave it in the live chat. And well, maybe we can just ask the one that I've got pulled up here. So the first question is from Daniel Gogi, and I'm not sure if he originally intended to have this up on the screen, but we'll go ahead and just ask it. So he says, what is the necessity of reincarnation, as almost none of us remember what we were in past lives?
So on the Vedantic worldview that I hold, the point of reincarnation is that this place is designed for us to learn certain soul-building lessons, just to put it short and sweet. And until we've learned those lessons, we keep coming back. It's kind of like if you fail a grade in university, university year, a paper, you do the paper again until you complete it. The fact that most of us don't remember past lives is that's explained by the Vedantic worldview, that the point of starting again fresh is so we have another go at it. We learn the lessons, based on the data in front of us. And if we remembered our past life, we might just get stuck by, you know, the trauma of remembering the past life, or how it messes with our identity in this life, or how it cements us in a habitual thought pattern or a stubbornness of attitude that we had in that life, and actually we needed to break free from in order to transform and elevate our consciousness.
Sorry, I was looking for I've got the wrong scene pulled up here. Sorry, folks. So, Seth, I wanted to put it over to you as well and just ask you, do you think that this is some evidence against reincarnation? The fact that we don't remember, most people, the vast majority of people do not remember past lives?
So in a Bayesian sense, you nearly have to say yes, right? Because if we're going to say that memories do count as evidence, then the general lack of it counts to some degree against it. I would say, yeah, to some how strong that is, I don't know. We can give a sort of conjunct explanation for why memories are wiped against it, but I think that makes that inherently less probable. And especially if you consider when you start adding theological reasons for it, if you want to say that people are, you're trying to get people to learn, that's when I think it gets really improbable, because this is whenever I think reincarnation doesn't make a lot of sense, that you have these memory wipes between lives. That's once you add that theological justification for the doctrine of reincarnation.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to push back on that quickly. I was thinking
Yeah,
about it
yeah,
earlier,
feel free.
that if you have say educating children, if you've got a child and you can see they keep hitting other kids or something, you might find it useful to make them completely forget the thing they did wrong. Or like sometimes children get involved too much in exploring their bodies with other kids, to put it PC. And in order to teach them not to do that as little children, you don't make them remember it. You might just like help them forget it, and then just, teach them other ways of like how that's not something you do. Or there could be various other lessons where actually the person forgetting is useful because it breaks them out of that habit. They don't think about it. And then you can just quietly teach them the lesson over here. And it doesn't matter if they remember. What matters is if they learn.
I think in specific cases that works. But what I would want to see, what I think would make sense of that, is that suppose I had 100 prior incarnations. I have zero memories of any of those. So what you would need to say is that that is true in all or nearly all cases. As well, you'd have to account for why this doesn't happen in the midst of my life, so to speak. So let's say it would be better for me, like your child, right? You say maybe you would like help your child forget. Why doesn't God allow your child to forget that in the midst of their life now? Why do they have to die for that to happen? So the coincidence, the correspondence of death with the memory wipe is what I want an account of for reincarnation in this scheme, and that's what I feel like is lacking.
I think a good way to think of it is like this life is like a learning thing that we enter into, and then when we leave, then we might remember all our lives or remember all the lessons. And something like people, when they near-death experiences, they often have their whole life flash before their lives, and there's
Right.
this is like a limited state of consciousness that we're in, because like when you play a video game, you just have a very limited awareness of the gamescape, and if you knew the whole thing, like, you wouldn't be able to learn whatever it is that you might be learning from playing that video game. It's the restriction in your knowledge of the field you're in that enables you to be able to do the problem solving and learn the challenges and so on. So similarly with the interpersonal things that we learn as humans going through this world, I think we learn them better and on a deeper level by having actually limited knowledge, where it's like you're just aware of what's right in front of you, you're deeply invested in it, you identify with it, and that's how you really get the interpersonal emotional lessons.
See, I disagree. I think that past, like just using my own life as an analogy, it's because I've learned lessons in the past. I can remember back to those previous mistakes that I can learn now. And I see no reason to limit that to only this life. If I could prevent a mistake because I made that mistake in the past and I could learn that now, that would be a quicker, more efficient way to learn that lesson. And so the fact that in nearly universally is not the case is just I think it's inexplicable.
So with different children, we see some children are just naturally more wise, more easygoing, more
Yeah.
mature, better with interpersonal skills. And I think of it as a crystallized kind of wisdom. So like generally life skills, it's not like a propositional knowledge of if this happens, do this, if that happens, do this. It's actually a kind of wisdom of like, oh, I know
Character.
what to
Yeah.
do here. yeah, like, oh, like, like some children have a scarcity complex. You give them a plate of food and they're like, it's not enough. It's like, eat all of that. If that's enough, then we'll give you more. And like, whereas another child, they're just happy. They're like, I know my parents are caring for me. I know I'm always going to get enough food, and they just don't flip out like that. And it's just different kinds of wisdom or, maturity that these children have
Yeah.
from past life lessons that they've learned, and it's carried with them. And we do that here, and we crystallize wisdom here. So often knowledge that we have, skills that we have, like someone can be an expert businessman and not be able to teach you how to do it because they haven't converted it to propositional knowledge. They know what to do in a situation. They know how to make the decision, but they're not able to articulate it because it's not propositional. It's just like, they just know what to do. It's a wisdom that they've earned.
Right. Yeah. And so I've heard this virtue formative response. It's like you don't carry on the memories, but you carry on the virtues because of that. To which my response has always been, well, yes, but it takes knowledge to become a loving person. It takes many conscious responses. And what reinforces that is the knowledge of what prior loving decisions have done. So if I love on this person and they, and I know what it does, like it makes me feel good, it turns me into a better person. That's both a cognitive thing and a virtue thing. And eventually, with the correspondence of the two, I'll become a perfectly loving person. But again, to use the analogy of my own life, it's because I have knowledge of prior experiences that I'm able to make these judgments and, again, develop my character. That the knowledge works with the character formation. And I think in a lot of instances, you'd probably agree with that we learn these experiences first cognitively so that we then can embody them in virtue. So again, it just gets back to the question of why can't I know those lessons that I learned cognitively in the past life, but I haven't had the chance to really form into virtues yet. That makes sense?
I mean, I think we're just going to disagree here, but just to give some examples, we see children like from age 15 running multi-million-dollar online businesses. Some people just start a business at a very young age and are totally expert at it.
Yeah.
And going with the crystallized past life wisdom hypotheses, this makes complete sense because it's some crystallized wisdom you can carry with you, and bam, you can just manifest it. And that crystallized wisdom, the virtue, probably a better word, when you play it out in the world, it just manifests as all these expertise, either in business or interpersonal things and so on.
Yeah, wisdom is.
If you guys don't mind,
go ahead.
Sorry. If you guys don't mind, yeah, we go ahead and move on to another question, just because we do have to make a hard stop in about 20 minutes. So sure. Yeah, let's move on to another question. This one's from Let Me Explain. Let me get it situated on the screen here. It's a long question. All right. So this one says, question for the Hindu, assuming aliens exist. This one, actually, when I was reading this, it is actually a really interesting question. So assuming that aliens exist for this question, could a human become an alien on the reincarnation hypothesis?
Yeah, so the Vedantic worldview that I accept holds that you could reincarnate as anything, including an alien. Yep. You could reincarnate.
But does it have to be
as a dog?
Does it have to be sentient?
So we don't distinguish different kinds of souls. So if something's living, it has a soul, and if it has a soul, it's the exact same kind of soul that you or me have. So, and we've had uncountable numbers of lives in the past, so we've all been trees before, for example. Trees just
that's what I was gonna ask is it depends on what the boundaries are that you want to draw around, like what could be ensouled. So like there's a really interesting question that a friend of mine, Parker Pensy, his podcast is called Parker's Pensies, and he's always asking this question to philosophers: could God have put my soul into a desk? I'm curious, like for an inanimate object like a rock, could you reincarnate as a rock?
No, it's got to be something living. I think there is a list somewhere in the Vedas of the qualities that a living thing has, but it's something like born, can produce offspring, and dies or something like that. Birth, death, disease, and old age are 4 features of human life. I'm not remembering the exact quote. It's something like that, though.
Can I throw in something as well?
Yeah, feel free.
Yeah, so on the alien thing, so it's not Arjuna can answer for the Hindus, but also for the New Age, for most New Age traditions, they actually do believe that we are going to be quote unquote extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials or something like that. So built into a lot of these Eastern systems of reincarnation is the idea that either we were or we will become extraterrestrial beings, non-human, sentient, earth-dwelling beings, if that's what we mean by extraterrestrial.
Yeah, the Vedantic, the Vaishnava worldview is that there's a spiritual world that we'll go and occupy, and it's got a different kind of physics from here, but it's got all the features we have here minus all the things that make it perverted, or there's no anxiety there, but there's every other emotion under the sun.
All right, let's move on to another question from the Autodidactic Layman, which is a really great name. It says, yes, for Seth, can the response to the problem of the unevangelized work against the allegation that karma, reincarnation, is unfair due to ignorance of past sins? Is that...
is ignorance akin to...
Is ignorance akin to ignorance of Christ?
Let me reread that. I'm going to need to reread that.
Sure.
Can the response to the problem of the unevangelized work against the allegation that karma reincarnation is unfair? I'm not sure. Do you understand that?
I can explain the question. Yeah. So the problem of the unevangelized is, people living in Ethiopia, they never heard about Christ. So, William Lane Craig saying God is fair on them by judging them based on what knowledge they did have access to. So if based on what they did know, they acted properly, then he'll reciprocate based on that. So I think the argument here is, obviously it lands a bit differently, because with karma, the person did do something with some knowledge in the past, and that, based on the moral fiber of the decisions they made, they're getting a reaction in a future birth. But if they can't remember it, then is it fair for God to judge them based on something they did in the past?
Yeah, I don't think it does work, because, it depends on what your response is to the unevangelized. And I think most Christians would say that God... Did we just lose Cameron?
It looks like my camera's overheated. Yeah, that's interesting. You guys can continue. Yeah. I'll try to work on my camera.
You should buy a Razer Kia Pro Ultra.
Yeah. We were talking about that before. I think most Christians would say that the problem of the unevangelized is answered. And this is why I got confused. It's answered by the fact that people do have sufficient knowledge. They usually use Romans 1 as a test, as a sort of proof text for showing that, people do, God judges everyone according to the knowledge that they have. And that is sufficient for condemnation. If that's what you hold about the problem of evangelized, and that's what your view of hell is, I don't think that sort of response works with the problem of karma and the lack of knowledge, because my point is that they really don't know past lives, whereas in the case of the unevangelized, they do know, and that's the sort of response. They do know, and they're just...
I agree. It doesn't work, because you're still being punished based on something, the moral fiber of your decisions. So when you're getting a karmic reaction, it is divvied out based on what you knew at the time. So if I push a button and that kills somebody, but I didn't know what the button did, and somebody told me to push the button and told me it did something different, I'm not responsible for that, because I didn't know. I didn't make an immoral decision in that case. We're judged based on the moral character of the decision we did make. But then when the question isn't related to that, it's related to, well, if we can't remember what we're being punished for, is that fair? So it is a different kind of thing. And we've discussed this before, so maybe we shouldn't rehash it. But yeah, I think the real question comes down to what's most beneficial. Is remembering it going to help us learn the lesson or not? I think that's the real disagreement.
Yeah, and just to point out, my objection wasn't that the erasure of past life memories is unfair. My point is that it doesn't make sense given the theological justification for reincarnation. And so it's not that it's so unfair that God erased past lives and blah, 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 blah. It's not that. It's given the sort of reasons that are given for why God gave us reincarnation. He ought to also have given us past life memories, more frequently at least. So that's what the objection is, just to clarify what I'm saying there.
Oh, we can't hear you, Cameron.
Oh, I had my microphone muted while I was adjusting my camera, but it looks like we're back temporarily. The reason why I think it overheated is because it is currently 103 degrees outside. I don't know what that is Celsius, but in this room that I'm in, it's also pretty hot in this room. Okay. So yeah, it's unfortunately affecting the camera. So hopefully it cools down here where I live. But We don't know. We don't know if it's going to.
A fan for the camera.
Yeah, I should. Or like put a little cold pack on it or something. All right. Let me explain. Says, for the Hindu, why would Brahma want specific people to be able to remember their past lives if without it there was a reset / another chance?
Just one clarification. So Brahma is the creator of this world, but he's just kind of an engineer empowered by God. We think Krishna or Vishnu is God. Little side point. So why, in response to the question, why do some people remember their past lives if without it they would reset another chance? So obviously, well, it wouldn't be that in all cases forgetting everything is totally beneficial. The cases where they do remember seems to be where there's trauma. So trauma leaves a deeper imprint. The deeper imprint is then carried over, and that's why in these cases there's memory. That's at least the explanation based on my understanding of Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam. And so, and that could be beneficial to them because they have some trauma they need to process. There's an impression on their soul. And so basically, yeah, the metaphysics of it is that the soul carries impressions depending how deep they are. The deeper ones are carried for longer and they need processing. And then the rest of us that don't remember our past lives, obviously that's not beneficial. So yeah, it sounds like the question is focusing on, well, if it's not beneficial to remember our past lives, then why do some people remember their past lives? And in short, the answer is, well, perhaps in those cases it is beneficial.
And I suppose, I'd kind of point out that, yeah, I think in a lot of cases it would be, but then why is it restricted to small children for the first few years? And there usually don't seem to be memories that are super beneficial, like getting, killed violently by murderers and stuff like that. So you might have an empirical case there, but I mean, we can talk about that if you want to.
Yeah, well, one thing you can say is there's a metaphysics to how the world is set up, and the metaphysics is beneficial because of all the reasons you want to give of why the soul carrying impressions means soul building, all that sort of stuff. And one feature of the metaphysics is that this happens, but the overall system is beneficial, and this is just one thing that plays out.
Yeah, we could get into the specifics of that. Cameron, do you want to keep going on questions?
Yeah, let's do one more question, and then we'll close out the stream for today. And this one is an interesting question. It's a theological question, so still super interesting. But I'll let you guys kind of have some back and forth on this one, and then we'll close out the show. Can we compare karma and original sin? Which is more just? So let's start with Seth.
Well, the answer is no. They're completely separate things, right? And so the idea of original sin is that in Adam we all sinned. And that's distinguished from original guilt, which I think more Christians believe, which is that somehow we're all guilty of somehow, even though we're not actually sinning with Adam, that somehow we're still guilty, or somehow that's passed on to us as a sinful nature. So original sin and karma is completely different because that's very individual, right? If I punch you in the face, then some down the line, that's going to come back upon me personally. And you ask the question of which is more just? Well, it depends on what your definition of justice is, right? Because this is something I think Arjuna and I and other people on his channel have talked about, is who has a better definition of justice? Because for in a Hindu mindset, it is this sort of individual idea of justice. What happens to me is because of what I do. Whereas I think we as Christians have a more corporate mindset, is that we are all responsible for one another. And thank goodness for that, because this is how I understand the vicarious atonement of Christ, is that we have a corporate responsibility to one another. So your sin in some way is also my sin. And I mean, if I've strawmanned it all, Arjuna, let me know. So.
Yeah, I had, what's this, I've lost his name right now. I had a Christian on just recently, and he, the one that lives next to you, and he was
Jimmy Aiken.
I had him on with, yeah, Jimmy Aiken, yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
He's awesome. It's embarrassing about his name. He mentioned how he thinks there's something parallel to karma in Christian belief. This idea that you reap what you sow is basically, you could see it as a corollary, not a corollary, a parallel to reincarnation. And basically that's how I think of reincarnation. I think there's major issues with the idea of original sin and the Christian doctrine, which is being punished for what someone else did. I have a crude analogy for it where I compare it to cosmic racism. God's judging us based on the race that we're born into, descended
Human
from
race.
Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I think, just quickly on karma, I think it's a more just system, because there's basically a full spectrum of reactions you can get based on the moral character of the decision you make. So as much variations in the degree of morality of my decisions, that's how many variations there are in the reactions I can get. Whereas at least on some Christian views, you either go to heaven or you go to hell, and then you get a borderline case problem of like, well, it's like, when does a pile of sand become a heap? Like, that's a philosophical problem that I don't see it as a real problem. But if the thing being decided is not, whether we use our social construct term of a heap to refer to this pile of grains of sand, that's not a problem. But if the problem is who's going to hell and who's not, and you just add a tiny little bit more sinfulness and suddenly the person's going to hell, that's a problem.
Well, to be fair, that's not what Christians think, right? They think you need to be morally perfect to get into heaven. Like any like 1 grain of sand. So it's not an arbitrary amount. It's got like 100 grains of sin, and you're going to hell, versus 99 and you're going to heaven, or something like that. They think that moral perfection is required for heaven.
Isn't Jesus carrying paying your tab? You pay what you can, and Jesus pays the rest.
Yeah, so it's difficult to represent all Christians here, but yes, and one view is that Jesus is vicariously atoning for us, penal substitutionary atonement view, which a lot of Protestants hold to. Yeah. But in that sense, that's the idea of moral perfection, right? Is this in the sense that I'm judged to be sinless because of the act of Christ.
So what's the version that escapes my objection? Because I think you do need to invoke mercy at some stage, because we can't be morally perfect on our own. We're getting mercy right?
Well, this gets into one of my objections, I think, with karmic system, with a lot of religious systems, which is you want God to equally hold 2 moral virtues imminently, perfectly, which is mercy and justice. Mercy defined as treating people better than they deserve, justice treating people as they deserve. Problem is you get into a contradiction there. If you treat people as they deserve, you're not treating them better than they deserve. And so what I see a lot of them do is wager it out, right? Some people get treated as they deserve, but to a certain extent, God is merciful and does the rest. That makes God finitely merciful and finitely just. Where justice is, mercy is absent. Where mercy is, justice is absent. I think that what's good about the Christian view is that justice is fully done with all. What needs to be dealt with is sin, and it's dealt with Christ. And that way God can be universally merciful upon all. All people are equally offered, or even given, if you're a universalist, are equally offered the salvation. And sin is universally dealt with. So God is perfectly just in that sense. And that's a way of trying to wrestle with these 2 aspects of God. And I think Christianity provides an answer.
I mean, we've got that mercy also on our view of, when you take shelter of God, then God destroys your karma and personally takes charge of the reactions that you do get in order to guide you through your soul building.
Unfortunately, we do need to wrap things up, just because I've got to drop my daughter off at a little event she has tonight. So we've got to wrap things up. I mean, we've only got a couple minutes here. Why don't we go one by one? Seth, just kind of wrap up your thoughts. Take about 60 seconds if you can. I know that's going to be difficult. We've been going almost 2 hours. But each of you, if you could just take around 60 seconds, kind of wrap up your thoughts, and then we'll go ahead and close it out.
Yeah. So first off, thank you so much, Arjuna, for being a great debate partner. Thank you so much, Cam, for hosting this. It's always a pleasure being on here. Basically, I have outlined 5 hypotheses that I think are equal to or better explanations, even if we assume that the phenomena of children remembering past lives is real. And if that is the case, then we are in no place to use these scientific arguments as a justification for belief in reincarnation. So I don't think Christians should fear, because we have a lot of explanatory resources. And again, I'm not even sure I'm convinced of the evidence, but that's a different video entirely. I encourage people to go check that out.
All right. Yeah. And Arjuna, whenever.
Yeah, cool. So thanks for hosting, Cam. It's a great channel. Great to be on here discussing interesting ideas. And Seth's always fun to talk to. He thinks about these things deeply and gives well-reasoned responses, never strawmans. So yeah, quick summary of my thoughts here. I continue to think reincarnation is the best explanation for this data. I gave a little bit about phenomenal conservatism, but basically it seems to be the case that these children remembering a past life. These other theories, they seem a little bit like it's a bit of a stretch to use them to explain the specificity of these cases of children having these memories, having these personality traits, having these birthmarks. That demonic, if it were demonic possession, we'd expect to see some oscillating back and forth. People can read the cases for themselves and see whether they think there's oscillating back and forth. I think walk-ins is consistent with the theory, and having two explanations for it. I don't see that as reducing it. So yeah, Seth mentions he thinks these 5 explanations are better or equal to reincarnation as explanations, and I disagree for reasons we've discussed. And of course, I think we've got independent reasons from the evidence for believing reincarnation. Of course, Christians don't, because their doctrine teaches them Christianity is not the case. There's some people who argue Christianity does teach reincarnation. I choose not to go there. I let Christians tell me what their religion teaches and just deal with them based on philosophy. But theological reasons for reincarnation are it's better for God's mercy and justice, and it explains how our earthly lives have a purpose, because if we can stuff it up, we can come here again. And I actually have a forthcoming philosophical paper in Faith and Philosophy, which has been accepted for publication, where we argue a lot of those theological stuff, but it still hasn't been published because academic journals, everything takes forever. But we're converting it to a popular level book too, so you can watch out for that coming out.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for coming on to discuss past life experiences. Not something we cover too much on Capturing Christianity, but it's fun to be able to look into different subjects, which is sort of what we've been doing lately on the channel, is exploring a lot of different topics that we really haven't touched on a whole lot before. So thank again, Seth and Arjuna, for coming on. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next Capturing Christianity video. As always, see you guys. Leave yet. I've got something super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like, you